Friends, today I want to speak about something we often ignore, things that quietly poison our minds and hearts. Life is already full of challenges. Why carry extra burdens we can release? There are 7 toxic things we must eliminate, and we must do it in silence, without announcing it to the world. True change is quiet, steady, and deliberate. Negative thoughts are like shadows that creep into our minds without permission, quietly shaping the way we feel and act. They are not always obvious at first. Sometimes they appear as fleeting doubts, minor irritations, or a quiet sense of unease. Yet, over time, if left unchecked, these thoughts can grow and dominate, coloring every perception, every decision, and every interaction. The mind is like a garden, and negative thoughts are the weeds that, if ignored, can choke the life out of the plants we wish to grow. One of the first steps in dealing with these thoughts is to recognize them, not as truths or commands, but as events, like clouds passing across a sky. They arise, they linger, and they can fade, but only if we observe them clearly and do not attach unnecessary meaning to them. When a thought of anger surfaces, instead of immediately reacting, notice it. Label it in your mind. This is anger, or this is fear. By doing so, you create distance between yourself and the thought. You realize that it is not a part of your essence, it is not you. It is merely a disturbance, a temporary visitor in the mind's quiet landscape. Often, negative thoughts feed on attention. The more we dwell on them, the stronger they become, gaining shape and power. They can grow into patterns of anxiety, resentment, or self-doubt that affect the way we treat ourselves and others. Therefore, observing them without judgment is crucial. Treat them as you would a wave on the shore. It rises, it crashes, it recedes. You do not need to fight it violently, nor do you need to cling to it. You simply acknowledge it and let it pass. Another way negative thoughts gain strength is through repetition and reinforcement. When a thought occurs, we often replay it in our mind, over and over, turning it into a narrative that seems undeniable. A small worry can become a catastrophic scenario, and a minor irritation can become a persistent grudge. Breaking this cycle requires conscious effort. When you notice a thought returning, remind yourself that you have seen it before, and that it does not deserve further attention. By consistently doing this, the thought loses its grip and the mind begins to return to calmness. The language we use internally is also powerful. Negative thoughts are often accompanied by harsh self-talk. Words like, "I can't," "I'm not good enough," or "this will never work," reinforce the thought's power. By changing the internal dialogue even slightly, you weaken the influence of these thoughts. Replace harsh judgments with neutral observations. Instead of thinking, "I always fail," observe, "This attempt did not go as planned." The subtle shift in language diminishes the emotional charge of the thought. Patience is another essential element. Negative thoughts will not vanish instantly. They may arise repeatedly, testing your resolve and composure. Responding to them with impatience or frustration only strengthens their hold. Accept that the mind is capable of both clarity and confusion, and that your task is to cultivate awareness, not to force perfection. Daily practices that strengthen mental clarity, such as meditation, journaling, or quiet reflection, help in noticing these thoughts early, before they accumulate into patterns that disturb peace. In addition, focusing on what is within your control lessens the power of negative thinking. Many harmful thoughts involve scenarios over which you have no real influence, worries about the past, speculation about the future, or judgments about others. By bringing attention back to your actions, your responses, and your attitudes, what you can control, you diminish the space that negativity occupies. Awareness, attention, and deliberate action work together. Each time you notice a negative thought and refrain from following it, you are training the mind. You are teaching it that these disturbances are temporary, that they do not define you, and that calm, clarity, and reason are stronger than fear, anger, or envy. Over time, this practice cultivates resilience. You are no longer tossed by every fleeting emotion or idea. The mind becomes a place of observation and discernment, rather than a battlefield. You begin to see that negativity thrives in secrecy and distraction, and that bringing it into awareness, examining it, and refusing to nourish it is the most effective way to diminish its power. By repeatedly observing, labeling, and letting go of harmful thoughts, The mind slowly becomes a sanctuary of reason and peace. Toxic people are those who take more from us than they give, those whose presence slowly drains our energy, clouds our judgment, and disturbs the calm of our minds. They often do not announce their harmful nature openly. It can be subtle, hidden behind charm, complaints, or manipulation. Yet, over time, their influence becomes apparent. We feel more stressed, more anxious, or more negative after interacting with them. The first step in dealing with toxic individuals is awareness. Recognize the patterns they create, the ways they shift conversations toward their own needs, the ways they criticize, belittle, or manipulate. Observation without immediate reaction is crucial. By seeing clearly, we remove the fog that allows their behavior to affect us unconsciously. Not every difficult interaction is toxic. Life contains challenges and conflicts that require patience, empathy, and understanding. Toxicity, however, is persistent. It undermines your confidence, your peace, and your ability to focus on what truly matters. Once you identify a toxic person, it is important to establish boundaries. Boundaries are not punishments or acts of aggression. They are clear statements of what you will and will not accept. They protect your energy, your mind, and your capacity to act with reason rather than reaction. These boundaries may be physical, such as limiting time spent with someone, or emotional, such as refusing to engage in conversations that breed guilt, anger, or resentment. Setting boundaries requires calm and consistency. Toxic people often test limits to see if they can regain influence. Responding inconsistently can signal weakness and invite repeated disturbance. By maintaining quiet firmness, you demonstrate that your peace is not negotiable. Distance is another necessary measure. Removing yourself from constant exposure does not require confrontation or explanation. It can be done silently, subtly, and without drama. Reduce interactions where possible, avoid unnecessary meetings or communications, and focus on spaces and relationships that nourish you rather than drain you. Toxic people often seek attention, validation, or control. By denying them the opportunity to manipulate or provoke, you deprive them of their power. It is also essential to reflect on why certain individuals affect you deeply. Toxicity often exposes unresolved fears, insecurities, or attachments. When a person triggers anger, envy, or fear, pause to examine your response. Understanding your inner vulnerabilities strengthens your resilience and prevents external negativity from dominating your thoughts. Another aspect is detachment from expectation. We sometimes assume that others will behave rationally, ethically, or kindly, and when they fail to meet those assumptions, we feel betrayed or hurt. Acceptance of human imperfection, especially in those who repeatedly harm or manipulate, reduces the emotional impact of their actions. Silence in dealing with toxic individuals is powerful. Announcing your decisions, arguing, or seeking validation from others often fuels the conflict or draws attention to negativity. By acting quietly, maintaining your dignity, and protecting your boundaries without fanfare, you retain control over your energy and actions. This quiet approach also fosters clarity. It allows you to observe the person's behavior without adding your own emotional charge, to see patterns more clearly, and to respond from reason rather than impulsive feeling. Surrounding yourself with people who support, encourage, and challenge you constructively is equally important. Positive influence counterbalances negativity, replenishes energy, and reinforces habits of calm and rational thought. Friendships and relationships should be chosen with care, with attention to how they impact your mind and spirit over time. Consistency in limiting exposure to toxic people builds strength. Each time you calmly step back, each time you maintain boundaries, you reinforce your control over your own mind and life. You learn to distinguish between what is worth your attention and what is not, to preserve mental clarity, and to act according to your principles rather than reaction. Over time, this practice cultivates an inner space where external negativity cannot easily intrude. The mind becomes less reactive, less burdened by others' demands or manipulations, and more capable of deliberate, reasoned action. By observing, setting boundaries, creating distance, and cultivating supportive relationships, you slowly reclaim your energy and peace from those who seek to disturb it. This process requires vigilance, patience, and consistency, but it is the path toward freedom from the subtle, persistent influence of toxic people. Complaining is one of the most common yet unnoticed habits that slowly erode our peace and cloud our judgment. It begins subtly, as a muttered frustration or a minor lament about circumstances, and if allowed to continue, it grows into a persistent pattern that shapes how we see the world. When we complain, we focus our attention on what is wrong rather than what can be done. This repeated focus magnifies problems in our mind, giving them more power than they deserve. Each complaint is a choice, and over time, the choices accumulate into a habit that reinforces negativity and prevents clarity. Complaining often provides a false sense of relief. When we voice our frustrations to others, we may feel momentarily lighter, as if sharing the burden releases it. Yet in truth, the act of complaining often reinforces the sense of helplessness. The mind fixates on the problem, rather than considering solutions or cultivating acceptance. Complaints, spoken aloud or silently repeated in thought, condition the mind to see life as unfair, people as obstructive, and circumstances as unbearable. One of the first steps in eliminating complaining is awareness. Notice when the urge to complain arises and what triggers it. Often, complaints are rooted in expectations of how people should behave, how situations should unfold, or how life should treat us. When reality fails to meet these expectations, frustration arises, and the instinct to complain follows. By observing these moments, we can separate what is within our control from what is not. Complaining rarely changes external reality, but it does shape our internal state. We may believe that expressing dissatisfaction is a form of action, but without constructive follow-through, it achieves little. Awareness allows us to redirect attention from lamenting to evaluating, from criticizing to acting. Another element is language. Complaining is fueled by the words we use, both outwardly and inwardly. Phrases such as, "This is unfair," "I can't stand this," or "Nothing ever goes right," reinforce a narrative of victimhood. By noticing the language we habitually use, we can begin to replace it with neutral observation. Instead of saying, "I hate traffic," observe, "The traffic is heavy. I will adjust my road or timing." Small shifts in language reduce the emotional charge of experiences and help the mind respond with reason rather than irritation. Silence can be a powerful tool in this process. Complaining often seeks validation from others, attention, or sympathy. By holding back, by resisting the urge to voice dissatisfaction unnecessarily, we cultivate self-reliance and mental discipline. Silence does not mean repression. It is a deliberate choice to observe, reflect, and respond rather than react impulsively. Reflection is another key. When frustration arises, pause to consider what, if anything, can be done. Action replaces complaint when it addresses the source of the problem. If the problem cannot be changed, acceptance replaces complaint by allowing the mind to release resistance. Acceptance is not surrender. It is the acknowledgement of reality and the conscious decision to focus energy on what can be influenced. Practicing gratitude counteracts the habit of complaining, noticing what is working, what is sufficient, and what is positive in each situation trains the mind to see balance instead of focusing solely on deficiencies. Even small shifts in attention, repeated consistently, weaken the impulse to complain. Patience is essential. Complaining often arises from a desire for immediate relief from discomfort or dissatisfaction. Training the mind to pause, observe, and choose a different response takes time. Each instance of restraint strengthens discipline and reduces the hold of negativity. Over time, refraining from complaining transforms perception. Situations that once provoked irritation become opportunities for problem-solving, reflection, or acceptance. Relationships benefit as constant complaints no longer burden those around us. The mind becomes clearer, calmer, and more resilient, no longer habitually distorted by dissatisfaction. By observing triggers, adjusting language, practicing silence, and redirecting energy toward action or acceptance, we slowly free ourselves from the corrosive habit of complaining and allow space for clarity, calm, and deliberate thought. Comparison with others is a subtle yet powerful source of dissatisfaction and inner unrest. From early in life, people are taught to measure themselves against others, to judge success by what others achieve, to evaluate worth by the possessions, recognition, or abilities of those around them. This habit, when left unchecked, becomes a constant drain on mental energy and emotional stability. The act of comparing pulls attention away from our own path, creating a false narrative that fulfillment exists elsewhere. It fosters envy, insecurity, and frustration, because there will always be someone who appears to have more, be more, or achieve more. Life is not a contest, yet comparison frames it as such. Each time we measure ourselves against someone else, we distort our perception of reality. We often see only the surface of another person's life, the successes, the accolades, the polished image, and assume that it reflects the whole truth. We ignore their struggles, their sacrifices, their failures, and the unseen effort behind their achievements. By focusing on what is visible rather than what is real, we allow incomplete information to shape our emotions and judgments. Comparison often leads to dissatisfaction with our own circumstances. Instead of recognizing what we have, the focus shifts to what we lack, to opportunities we did not take, or to traits we wish we possessed. This creates a persistent sense of inadequacy, regardless of actual accomplishments or progress. It also undermines gratitude, because appreciation requires presence and attention to what is already here. Observing the habit of comparison is the first step toward liberation. Notice the moments when the mind drifts toward others, successes, or possessions. Recognize the subtle emotions that accompany these thoughts: envy, frustration, self-doubt, or anxiety. By labeling these emotions and understanding their source, we begin to create distance between ourselves and the comparison. One principle in countering comparison is focusing on what is within your control. Other people's lives, achievements, and behaviors are largely beyond influence. The only true domain of control is your own actions, decisions, and responses. By redirecting attention from what others are doing to what you can do, you reclaim energy that was previously wasted on judgment or envy. Another approach is to redefine success and value according to your own standards. Instead of measuring against societal expectations or the apparent achievements of others, consider what is meaningful for your life, growth, and well-being. When the mind is anchored in personal purpose, comparison loses its appeal, because fulfillment is determined by internal standards rather than external benchmarks. Silence and reflection are essential in this process. Talking about others' achievements with envy or criticizing oneself aloud only reinforces the habit of comparison. Observing these thoughts quietly allows the mind to see them for what they are: temporary, external, and irrelevant to your path. Gratitude further diminishes the power of comparison. By regularly noticing and appreciating your own accomplishments, qualities, and experiences, the mind shifts from scarcity to abundance. Small daily practices, such as listing things you value about yourself or your progress, build a sense of self-worth independent of others. Patience is required, because comparison is a deeply ingrained habit. The mind may repeatedly return to measuring against others, but each moment of awareness and redirection strengthens mental discipline and self-reliance. The habit of comparison also distorts relationships. Envy or resentment toward others can erode trust and empathy, while admiration without reflection may breed unrealistic expectations or self-criticism. By focusing on your own journey, you preserve harmony in interactions, appreciating others without measuring your value against theirs. Over time, consistently resisting the impulse to compare cultivates equanimity. Achievements of others become sources of inspiration rather than triggers of insecurity. Failures or shortcomings in yourself are seen as opportunities for growth rather than evidence of inferiority. The mind becomes less reactive, calmer, and centered on what truly matters: personal development, ethical conduct, and purposeful action. By observing the tendency to compare, redirecting attention to what is within control, redefining personal standards, practicing gratitude, and exercising patience, the influence of comparison weakens, allowing space for clarity, contentment, and deliberate living. Bad habits are silent thieves of time, energy, and peace of mind. They begin subtly, often disguised as comfort, convenience, or temporary relief, and over time they grow into patterns that dominate our behavior without conscious awareness. A habit is a repeated action, reinforced by familiarity and ease. The problem arises when habits serve short-term pleasure or avoidance but undermine long-term well-being, growth, and clarity. Bad habits can take many forms: procrastination that delays important tasks, overeating or neglecting health, wasting time on distractions, speaking harshly without thought, or reacting impulsively to circumstances. Each habit, small on its own, accumulates consequences that erode self-discipline and control. Awareness is the first step toward change. Most bad habits operate unconsciously. They are performed without deliberate thought. Observing behavior without judgment allows us to see patterns clearly. Notice when and why the habit arises, what triggers it, and what emotional or environmental conditions support it. Awareness alone is not enough, but it is the foundation for intentional action. Reflection follows awareness. Ask why the habit exists and what purpose it serves. Often, habits are coping mechanisms, ways to soothe anxiety, avoid discomfort, or escape responsibility. Understanding the need behind the habit provides insight into how to replace it with a healthier or more constructive action. Change begins with small, deliberate steps. Attempting to eliminate a deeply ingrained habit all at once often leads to frustration and relapse. Instead, focus on incremental improvement. Replace the harmful habit with a positive action that satisfies the underlying need, or redirect energy into productive tasks. Consistency over time matters more than intensity. Discipline is central to transforming habits. A single failure is not defeat, but repeated indulgence without reflection reinforces the pattern. Each time the mind chooses restraint, each time action aligns with principle rather than impulse, the habit weakens and self-control strengthens. Environment plays a crucial role. Bad habits are often supported by surroundings that make them easy or rewarding. Altering the environment to reduce triggers and temptations supports the mind's effort. This may include removing distractions, organizing spaces to encourage focus, or surrounding oneself with people who reinforce positive behavior. Patience is essential. Habits form slowly and are reinforced over time. Their dissolution also requires time and persistence. Impatience often leads to harsh self-criticism or abandonment of effort, which strengthens the old habit's grip. A gentle but firm approach, focusing on progress rather than perfection, nurtures resilience and sustained change. Self-reflection complements action. Journaling, meditation, or quiet contemplation allows the mind to track patterns, notice improvement, and recognize areas needing attention. This conscious engagement ensures that the mind remains active in shaping behavior rather than being led passively by impulse. Accountability, though internal rather than external, supports transformation. Commit to observing your own behavior, tracking progress, and adjusting as necessary. External validation is secondary. The aim is mastery over oneself, not approval from others. Emotional regulation also affects habits. Many harmful actions are fueled by unexamined emotions, boredom, anxiety, anger, or restlessness. By observing and addressing the underlying emotion, rather than reacting automatically, the mind interrupts the habitual cycle. Each time a habit is resisted or replaced with deliberate action, the mind strengthens its capacity for choice. The process is cumulative. Over time, these small victories compound, and habits that once dominated behavior lose their power. Self-discipline grows, clarity of thought increases, and the mind becomes a place of reason and deliberate action. Understanding triggers, practicing awareness, taking incremental steps, restructuring the environment, cultivating patience, reflecting on progress, and regulating emotion are all essential components in eliminating bad habits. By consistently applying these principles, the mind gradually frees itself from patterns that hinder growth, and the individual moves toward a life guided by purpose, reason, and deliberate action. Holding grudges is one of the heaviest burdens we can carry, yet it is often accepted as a natural response to harm or injustice. A grudge begins as a reaction to a perceived wrong, a hurtful word, a betrayal, or an unfair action, and lingers long after the event has passed. The mind clings to the memory of the offense, replaying it repeatedly, and feeding on resentment. Each recollection strengthens the emotional charge, keeping anger and bitterness alive, and making it difficult to think clearly or act with reason. Grudges are insidious because they affect not only how we feel about the person who caused the harm, but also how we feel about ourselves. They create tension, distract from meaningful tasks, and can poison other relationships. Often, the desire to hold a grudge comes from a mistaken belief that it protects us, or that it somehow punishes the person who harmed us. In truth, the person who wronged us may be entirely unaware of our continuing resentment, and even if they are aware, The grudge does not alter the past. Its weight is borne solely by the one who holds it. Awareness is the first step in releasing a grudge. Recognize when the mind returns to the memory of the offense and notice the emotions it evokes. Label the emotions anger, hurt, betrayal, or fear. By observing without judgment, we begin to create distance between ourselves and the persistent resentment. Understanding the impermanence of both events and emotions is also essential. The offense, though real at the moment, exists only in memory now. Emotions, too, are temporary responses that arise and pass. By reminding ourselves of this transience, we can weaken the intensity of lingering anger and reduce the need to hold on to it. Forgiveness, when approached as a deliberate choice rather than a feeling, is a tool for liberation rather than condoning wrongdoing. It is not an act for the benefit of the other person, but a conscious decision to free the mind from the chain of resentment. Forgiveness involves acknowledging the harm, understanding its context if possible, and releasing the insistence on retribution or continued anger. Reflection on our own imperfection also diminishes the need for grudges. Everyone makes mistakes, acts out of fear, ignorance, or weakness at times. Recognizing that harm is often unintentional or a product of human frailty allows the mind to approach the situation with perspective rather than relentless judgment. Silence and discretion are important in this process. There is no need to announce forgiveness or to seek validation from others. The act of letting go is internal. It is a quiet decision that strengthens the mind and liberates the spirit. Attempting to force emotional release prematurely may create tension or self-doubt, whereas patient observation and gradual detachment allow the grudge to lose power naturally. Acceptance complements forgiveness. Accepting that the past cannot be changed, that people act according to their nature and circumstances, and that clinging to resentment harms only oneself, creates the mental space for freedom. This does not mean indifference or passivity, but rather the cultivation of equanimity in the face of offense. Awareness of triggers is also necessary. Situations, reminders, or encounters can reignite old grudges. By noticing these triggers without reacting impulsively, the mind strengthens its capacity for calm observation. Each time the mind chooses to respond with reason rather than resentment, it reinforces resilience and weakens the habitual pull of the grudge. Patience is essential because grudges are often deeply ingrained. The mind may repeatedly return to the memory of the harm, testing the resolve to let go. Consistent practice of observation, forgiveness, reflection, acceptance, and patience gradually reduces the grip of resentment. Over time, the energy once devoted to maintaining the grudge can be redirected toward constructive action, personal growth, and meaningful relationships. Through deliberate effort, the mind becomes freer, clearer, and more capable of responding with reason, rather than being enslaved by anger and bitterness. Fear of change is one of the most persistent obstacles to growth and peace of mind. From early in life, the mind seeks stability and predictability. Familiar routines, known environments, and habitual behaviors provide a sense of safety. Yet, life is inherently dynamic, and resisting change is often a source of unnecessary suffering. Fear arises because change carries uncertainty, and the mind instinctively equates uncertainty with risk or loss. This fear can manifest in many ways: reluctance to pursue new opportunities, avoidance of difficult conversations, clinging to outdated habits, or staying in relationships and situations that no longer serve us. Each act of resistance drains energy, creates stress, and limits the potential for growth. Awareness is the first step in confronting fear. Notice the moments when hesitation or anxiety arises at the prospect of change. Observe the thoughts and feelings associated with it, without judgment. By acknowledging fear as a natural reaction, rather than an insurmountable barrier, we create space to respond deliberately rather than react impulsively. Understanding the impermanence of circumstances also weakens fear. Change is a constant in life, and no situation, however comfortable, is permanent. By accepting this reality, the mind can approach transitions with curiosity rather than dread. Preparing for change is another crucial element. When possible, consider the steps required to navigate the shift. Preparation reduces uncertainty and strengthens confidence. This does not mean controlling every outcome, which is impossible, but rather equipping oneself with knowledge, skills, and a clear sense of priorities to face circumstances with composure. Perspective shifts are essential. Fear often magnifies potential negatives while minimizing potential benefits. By consciously evaluating both the risks and the opportunities, the mind gains clarity. Change, while uncomfortable, can lead to growth, learning, and the development of resilience. Each experience of adaptation strengthens the capacity to face future challenges. Patience is also necessary. Change rarely occurs instantly, and adjustment requires time. The mind may resist repeatedly, returning to old fears or habitual patterns of avoidance. Consistent effort, reflection, and observation reduce resistance gradually, allowing the process of adaptation to unfold naturally. Internal dialogue plays a significant role. Thoughts like, "I cannot handle this," or "What if I fail?" reinforce fear and magnify uncertainty. By consciously redirecting these thoughts toward practical consideration, "I can take one step at a time," or "I will respond as best I can," the mind regains control and diminishes anxiety. Acceptance complements action. Some aspects of change are beyond control, and resisting them wastes energy and prolongs suffering. By focusing on what can be influenced and releasing what cannot, the mind cultivates clarity and composure. Each choice to engage with change, rather than resist it, builds resilience. Observing the emotions that accompany fear without being dominated by them is essential. Fear often triggers physical tension, restless thoughts, or a desire to retreat. By noticing these reactions and responding calmly, the mind strengthens self-mastery. Gradually, experiences of navigating change transform perception. Situations that once caused dread are approached with equanimity, learning, and adaptability. The mind becomes less reactive, less bound by uncertainty, and more capable of deliberate, thoughtful action. Supportive practices reinforce this process. Reflection, journaling, or quiet contemplation helps to track progress, evaluate outcomes, and strengthen understanding. Small successes in facing change compound over time, building confidence and reinforcing the ability to embrace future transitions. Exposure to incremental change is also helpful. By gradually facing new experiences or challenges, the mind learns that discomfort is temporary, adaptation is possible, and fear need not dominate action. Over time, this repeated practice weakens the habitual resistance to change. By cultivating awareness, preparing thoughtfully, evaluating perspective, accepting what is beyond control, observing emotions, and taking incremental steps, the mind gradually diminishes the fear of change and strengthens the capacity to navigate life with clarity, resilience, and reason. Cultivating inner peace in silence is one of the most powerful practices for maintaining clarity and balance in life. Inner peace is not the absence of challenges, difficulties, or discomfort, but the presence of a calm, steady mind that is not easily disturbed by external events. It is a state that allows one to observe circumstances clearly, act with reason, and respond rather than react. Silence is essential in this process because it removes the constant noise of judgment, complaint, and distraction that clouds perception and fuels agitation. The mind, when constantly engaged in speech, whether outwardly or inwardly, is more susceptible to impulsive thoughts, unnecessary worry, and emotional turbulence. Observing the mind in quiet reflection allows one to see thoughts and emotions as they arise, without immediately identifying with them or giving them undue power. Awareness of the present moment is central to cultivating inner peace. Many disturbances arise not from external events themselves but from our mental commentary about them. Anticipation, regret, judgment, and expectation amplify discomfort and create internal chaos. By noticing these patterns in silence, one can begin to distinguish between the event and the reaction to the event. This distinction allows the mind to respond rationally rather than being swept away by habitual emotional reactions. Discipline is necessary in developing this practice. The mind is trained by repetition, and habitual agitation or restlessness can only be countered by repeated exercises in observation and restraint. Choosing silence, consciously refraining from unnecessary speech or mental chatter, strengthens the ability to remain centered in the face of provocation or disturbance. Reflection complements silence. Quiet contemplation allows the mind to examine its own processes, the source of irritation, the triggers of anxiety, and the patterns of desire that disturb calm. By identifying these tendencies, one gains insight into the ways in which inner peace is disrupted and how it can be nurtured intentionally. Patience is essential because the mind is not transformed instantly. Disturbances, old habits of thought, and reflexive reactions will arise repeatedly. Each moment of awareness, each act of restraint, is a step toward strengthening mental stability. Over time, these repeated efforts create a durable foundation of tranquility. Attention to what is within one's control reinforces inner peace. Many disturbances originate from concern over events, actions, or decisions beyond personal influence. By focusing energy on what can be shaped attitudes, choices, and responses, the mind preserves its calm rather than being scattered by forces it cannot change. Gratitude also plays a role, even in silence. Noticing the aspects of life that are sufficient, that provide stability, or that contribute to well-being reinforces a sense of contentment. This does not require verbalization. Internal acknowledgement is sufficient to strengthen equanimity. Detachment from outcomes is another principle. Peace does not require that all desires be fulfilled or that events unfold perfectly. By cultivating acceptance of what is, rather than clinging to what should be, the mind reduces agitation and fosters stability. Each thought, emotion, or impulse is observed, acknowledged, and allowed to pass, rather than being grasped or resisted. Simplicity supports this practice, reducing unnecessary complexity in daily life. Excessive possessions, obligations, or distractions frees the mind from constant stimulation and promotes space for reflection and calm. Regular routines of quiet observation, meditation, or contemplation strengthen the capacity to maintain silence and resist distraction. Emotional regulation is integral to sustaining inner peace. Recognizing the rise of anger, fear, or impatience without immediate reaction allows the mind to respond rationally. Each moment of choice strengthens the habit of reason over impulse. Habits of speech also influence mental state. Unnecessary criticism, gossip, or complaint reinforces agitation and disperses energy. By practicing restraint in communication, one conserves mental clarity and cultivates focus on what truly matters. Over time, these practices build resilience. External events continue to occur, challenges continue to present themselves, yet the mind remains grounded, capable of measured response rather than reactive turbulence. The cultivation of inner peace in silence, through awareness, reflection, restraint, focus on what is controllable, acceptance, and patience, gradually transforms the mind into a space of clarity, stability, and reasoned action.